the New York Post wrote up that a Haitian person hit someone in a car while making an illegal turn. This was a person who's here legally. Nobody was hurt. This is a traffic violation. Obviously, we should all use our blinkers and obey the rules of the road. But like, this isn't a national news story. This isn't even a local news story. Somebody made a wrong. Like what? But it's in the New York Post now, and so this is it's really irresponsible on the part of national, I mean, right wing, but mainstream media. And there's no, it's out now, right? Like the local paper can, I mean, I'll put in the show notes as well. This is going to be my psych recommends. There's a Columbus Dispatch article on Haitian Springfield residents speaking out on, I mean, the headline is literally, quote, "They hate us. Haitian Springfield residents speak out as city remains in spotlight." You know, so the local media, the local press, whatever, local actors like the city manager, et cetera, will do what they can to put the genie back in the bottle, but it's out, right? Like, how do you undo this? You can't.
Yeah, I mean, and I wonder, it's exactly that. I mean, they'll probably move on eventually from Springfield, but if they've managed to turn it, even coming out of what is not a true story into turning migration as being a primary, subject of this election, they've done as they need to do. Maybe the analogy to give a bit of context for India, for people who are not as familiar with India, when COVID happened, in the first few months, there was a big gathering of folks from a particular Muslim community called the Tablighi Jamaat, which travels. They're something like a missionary set of groups that tend to move around the world, evangelizing, but also just running meetings across India, Malaysia, Indonesia, and further afield. And they happen to have all been caught been stuck in one part of Delhi when lockdown was announced, or around then. And beginning there were implications in the Indian press that they were out to intentionally spread COVID. A rumor was spread and amplified by members of the Indian mainstream press that Muslims are purposely spitting in their food to spread COVID. Again, some of this comes from a specific attempt from the Indian Hindu right to create an economic boycott of Muslims, because Muslims, for example, tend to be poorer and so are more likely to be street food hawkers. They tend to have this kind of job. And then as a way of trying to get Hindus to no longer eat at those spots, these rumors start somewhere locally and then get blown up and turn into a national thing. And even in attempting to debunk it, you've almost let
You're talking about it. Exactly. And here's the thing. There's always another city, right? There's always another restaurant. There's always another group. Like there's 1 billion people in India. There are hundreds of millions of Americans. You can always find some other nonsense in some corner of this country that people will then flock to and say, yes, it did happen. No, it didn't happen. And the other thing that I wanted to mention on this, to your point about raising the salience of immigration, there was a study that I will also put in the show notes that looked at Sweden. And basically what they found is that the introduction, establishment, successive far-right parties raises the salience of migration as an issue and also makes people realign their political views around immigration as opposed to economic concerns. And this is in Sweden, where classical economic concerns have been like the most important forever and ever. So their theory is, if it's true in Sweden, it holds elsewhere too. Obviously, there are differences between Sweden and the US and Sweden and India, caveats apply, but and it's true for the right as well as the left, right? So like, if you don't think this is good, you're now sort of categorizing yourself around immigration as opposed to tax policy or your views on small businesses or, I don't know, inflation. Not that obviously there are ties between immigration and the economy, but immigration becomes what is top of mind in terms of your voter preferences and also in terms of your ideology, right? The way you're seeing the world. That is the power, per this study, of far-right parties and the way in which they speak about people, the way in which they present information. getting into your political ecosystem.
And that does create a real dilemma for more progressive parties about how to respond to it, because there was a lot of conversation first half of this year in the UK about whether if the Labour Party just didn't talk about immigration, then maybe the issue would go away, which didn't strike me as a particularly sensible way of talking about the issue, even if people had legitimate disagreements with particular policy responses. And, there's a debate to be had about whether Labour was right or whether anyone else was right in the way that in the way that they thought about it. The problem is, as you say, that once this stuff is in the discourse, it's in the discourse, and people who are the only people you can get away with not talking about it to are other people who don't care about it. And that will be true of some bits of the electorate, but is probably not true of the bits of the electorate that needs to be reached by any mainstream party that's trying to be competitive across the country. So it does create dilemmas where all parties are pushed towards different varieties of toughness, rather than towards saying, actually, this is all fine. It's not. There are ways in which you can talk about the positive benefits of immigration, but depending on the way in which it's being discussed, if it's being discussed in terms of people smugglers and boatloads coming in, as it has been in the UK, you can't just say this is fine, because it's self-evident it isn't fine.
I mean, and you can also always find an immigrant who's done something bad, like in the same way that you could always find a white American who's committed a crime, right? Like, there was this poor father in Springfield, Ohio, whose child was killed by a Haitian driver, saying, "I wish that it had been a white American who killed my son, so that you would stop talking about us, so that you would stop talking, so you would stop vilifying a community because of my family's personal tragedy." But you can always find, of course, you can find somebody who's not from here, quote unquote, who committed a crime. That doesn't, but and then me saying, like, actually immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than native born Americans, or immigrants actually use fewer state resources than Americans. Like, it doesn't matter. We're already talking about people as I mean, it's just so dehumanizing. And I think the other thing we're seeing here is that there's no right-wing position that you can run on if you are a liberally minded person that the far right cannot outrun. Okay? It does not matter that Kamala Harris went on to that debate. And I also want to be I just want to be conscious, she, in talking about this to the wide and varied American body politic, has the added challenge of herself, the added opportunity and also added challenge of herself being the daughter of two immigrants, right? Which is she is walking a political tightrope on this issue generally, and also personally and specifically. I'm not trying to say that I've never campaigned as anything, but also as a non-white person in America. So I understand that there are added challenges to this. However, she also went up on the debate stage and tried to make the issue, well, Trump didn't support this border bill that we were going to pass. We're not talking about that, right? We're talking about legal migrants and their alleged consumption patterns, because there's no there's no position you can stake out that extremists, which is what Trump is on this issue, won't find a way to go past, in my view, that I think is being borne out by our current reality.
Yeah, and also a debate about something extreme is always going to be more interesting than a debate about policy in terms of policies that are being proposed and debated on the national stage. So I can completely understand why the media wants to go with eating cats and dogs rather than the politics of why a border bill got blocked. It's just more interesting, especially if the people who are making the allegation in the first place are doubling down on it. You can't stop that happening.
I do have to say that, again, watching from afar, the limited access that I have to seeing some more right-wing, pro-Trump even and analytical minds, a lot of them seemed quite down about this after the debate itself. They did feel like it was, as you mentioned, that Trump was, so aside from the question of us sticking on migration as a topic, it did seem that him going after, not in some ways, not more traditional things like crime rape, that sort of those kinds of allegations, but to going to something as extreme as eating pets almost was a mistake and feeds into the weird and as Kamala said. So I seem to see, including on Fox News and elsewhere, quite a few right wingers saying that Trump messed up in doing this.
They don't want him to do the weird internet version of this, right? They're okay with the noxious xenophobia, but they're not okay when it's like scraped from like some dark corner of the internet that like five guys who spend all their day online, they know exactly what you're talking about. And the average American is like, sorry, what? Like you read it on what forum? Like that I think is where they're at now, where they're trying to bring him back from internet conspiracy world into something that can be presented as relevant to the lives of the American voter.